So you might have found the valuable future account pretty persuasive, but it has a problem, and it's one that Marquis sort of gets at the very end of the paper and very briefly. And in my view, he does not do a very good job of dealing with the problem. So I'll sketch out what the problem is and then get into it in more detail. So the basic problem is that the VFA is too broad. There are beings that are like this. On the one hand, they have a valuable future, but on the other hand, it is okay to deprive them of that valuable future. And if that's correct, then whatever's wrong about killing, it's not just that it's a deprivation of a valuable future. And then that undermines the VFA, and that means that Marquis' pro-life argument fails. So what are we talking about? Well, in particular, we're talking about contraception. So just briefly, contraception, that means against conception, and that means birth control. So condoms, birth control pill, IUDs, and all the rest. So what is the contraception criticism of the valuable future account? Well, valuable futures are prevented by many actions, including not having as many children as possible. And so there are many ways you might avoid having as many children as possible. You might use contraception, you might not have sex at all, you might have sex only during, or a woman might have sex only with a man only in periods where she's not ovulating. Any of those would be ways of avoiding having as many children as possible. Now, these actions are not wrong, but they do prevent valuable futures, right? Why? Well, because there are lots of children who would have come into the existence but for the contraception, but for the celibacy. And so if you're using contraception or you're celibate, then when you would have otherwise been engaged in heterosexual sex, then you're preventing children from coming into existence, and that means you're preventing valuable futures from coming into existence. But these actions are fine. There's nothing wrong with using contraception, and there's nothing wrong with being celibate. So that means a valuable future is mistaken, right? Is it always wrong to prevent a valuable future? No, because on the one hand, it's okay to use contraception and be celibate, and on the other hand, those actions prevent valuable futures. And so it looks like, well, the VFA is just wrong. It's too broad. Marquis has a reply to this objection. He says, basically, you've misread my account. What my account says is that depriving a being of a valuable future, that is very wrong. But it doesn't say that, but there's a difference between doing that and preventing the existence of a thing that would have a valuable future if it were to exist. So suppose there's a thing that now does exist, and it has a valuable future. Then Marquis says destroying it is wrong, you've deprived it of a valuable future, and that's bad. But now suppose there's a thing that doesn't yet exist, and suppose that if it were to come into existence, it would have a valuable future. Marquis thinks preventing its existence, that's okay. You're not taking existence, you're not taking a valuable future away from anything, because the thing doesn't exist yet, so it can't have anything taken away from it. So it's not okay to take away a valuable. Is it okay to take a valuable future away from something that exists? No, that's not okay. What is okay is to prevent the existence of something that would have a valuable future if it existed, because as long as you're just doing the prevention, there's nothing there to be that is done wrong to or harmed or injured or victimized in any way. When there's a thing that exists, then you can harm, deprive, victimize, injure it. But if it doesn't exist, you can't do anything wrong to it. So Marquis says, look, deprivation is bad, prevention, no problem. So we then look at contraception. Well, look, contraception, all it does is prevent a valuable future. Nothing is deprived of a valuable future. It prevents the existence of a thing that would have a valuable future. So contraception doesn't do any deprivation, and that means it's okay, unlike abortion, right? Abortion deprives an existent being of a valuable future. Contraception merely prevents the existence of a thing that would have a valuable future if it were to exist. So abortion deprivation, contraception prevention, deprivation bad, prevention okay, so abortion bad, contraception okay. Okay, so, on the one hand you might think, well, what's the big difference between deprivation and prevention? But there is a big difference. Namely, in one case there's a thing there that's losing something, and in the other case there isn't. So there is, it would seem, a difference between deprivation and prevention. However, we want to ask, why is Marquis so sure that contraception is merely prevention in the relevant sense? Of course, in some sense, contraception is prevention. It's prevention of pregnancy. But the relevant question is there perhaps when we use contraception, there is something that is deprived of a valuable future. So, in one sense, clearly, of course, contraception is prevention, but might contraception also involve deprivation? So Marquis is aware of this worry. He says, in contraception, there is no candidate that is deprived of a valuable future, but he's too quick at this point. So he says, look, there are 4 possible candidates things you might think that are deprived of a valuable future, but in fact, none of them are deprived of a valuable future. So what are the 4 candidates? What are the 4 possible things that might be deprived of a valuable future? Well, a sperm, some sperm or other, is deprived of a valuable future. An egg. It's an egg, the ovum, that's deprived of a valuable future. Or a sperm and an ovum separately, so a sperm is deprived and an ovum is deprived. Or the sperm and the ovum together. So he thinks none of these are good candidates for things. He thinks none of these are deprived of valuable futures, and those are the only things. If contraception deprives anything of a valuable future, it's one of these 4. But contraception doesn't deprive any of those 4 of a valuable future, and so contraception, in fact, does not deprive anything of a valuable future. Contraception merely prevents, and so contraception really is okay. It's only abortion that is not okay, because only abortion is a deprivation, whereas contraception is only and merely prevention. Okay, so let's look at these candidates. Why does he think that these 4 candidates are not, that none of them are deprived? So, well, he says, look, any reason that a sperm would be deprived of a valuable future would also be a reason that an ovum is deprived of a valuable future, and vice versa. Any reason that an ovum is being deprived of a valuable future would be a reason that the sperm is also deprived of a valuable future. And that means that either both the sperm and the ovum are deprived of a valuable future, or neither of them are deprived of a valuable future. And if that's correct, then the first 2 options are not correct. It's not the case that only a sperm is deprived of a valuable future, and it's not the case that only an ovum is deprived of a valuable future. Okay. So that means it's not option 1 or 2. What about a combination of one sperm and an ovum? Now, I have to tell you honestly, he distinguishes between the 3 and 4, the sperm and the ovum separately, and the sperm and the ovum together. I am not entirely clear what he means by that distinction. I might have some grasp of it, but he doesn't really explain it, and so I'm not going to worry too much about the difference between 3 and 4, and I'm just going to talk about the combination of a sperm and an ovum. So he says, look, when you in heterosexual sex, when the man ejaculates, there's lots of sperm, and so when contraception is used, there are lots of sperm that are prevented from getting to the egg. Which sperm might have fertilized the egg if contraception hadn't been used? There's no fact about which one would have. There are millions of sperm that might have done it, and there's just no fact about which one would have done it if, say, the man hadn't been wearing a condom, or the woman hadn't had an IUD, or the woman hadn't been on birth control. One of them might have done it, but which one would have, there's just no fact. So this means there's no fact about which sperm would have fertilized the egg, and this means there's no fact. The only sperm that is deprived, that could be deprived, is the one that would have fertilized the egg. But there's no fact about which sperm would have fertilized the egg, and therefore there's no fact about which sperm is deprived of a valuable future, and therefore there's no fact about which sperm plus ovum combination is deprived of a valuable future. And so you might think, oh, well, okay, it's not the sperm alone, it's not the ovum alone, it's not the sperm plus ovum combination. None of those possibilities is deprived of a valuable future, and therefore nothing is deprived of a valuable future. But no, Marquis has contradicted himself. Let's see why. Well, either there's a fact about which sperm would have fertilized the egg, or there's not a fact about which sperm would have fertilized the egg. That is, there are millions of sperm that would have gone for it. One of them would have made it. Maybe there's a fact about which one would have made it. Maybe there's not a fact about which one would have made it. Okay, well, suppose that there's not a fact about which one would have made it. Well, then look, there is a difference between sperm and ovum. There is a fact about which ovum is deprived, but there's not a fact about which sperm is deprived. And so there is a reason to say that the ovum alone is deprived. He says, look, any reason that a sperm is deprived is a reason that an ovum is deprived, and any reason that an ovum is deprived is a reason that a sperm is deprived. But if there's no fact about which sperm is going to make it, then there is a difference between the ovum and the sperm. There's a fact about which ovum would have been fertilized, but there's not a fact about which sperm would have done the fertilizing, and so we can say, yeah, the ovum is special, it's the ovum. On the other hand, if there is a fact about which sperm would have done the fertilization, then we can say it's that sperm and the ovum. It's the sperm that would have done the fertilizing and the ovum that would have been fertilizing, and those two together, they are deprived of a valuable future. So either way, in fact, it looks like something is deprived of a valuable future. And the problem is that what he in saying why the combination isn't deprived, he gives us a reason to say why the ovum alone is deprived. Now, in fact, I think it's most plausible to say that the combination is deprived. Let's think about it for a minute. So first of all, we can consider cases of artificial insemination. This is where, so insemination is insertion of semen. Artificial is it's done not via the natural method of sex, but in some other way. And in some of these methods, a particular sperm might be chosen to do the insemination. And if we then stop that artificial insemination, there would be a fact about which sperm was deprived, namely the one he had just chosen to use, and then we could say that sperm was deprived. And yet, there's nothing wrong with choosing not to do artificial insemination. And so, maybe some cases of contraception would turn out to be okay on his view, but artificial insemination would not be okay. Or, excuse me, stopping artificial insemination would be wrong because we could say which sperm and ovum are deprived, and so his view is wrong about artificial insemination. His view would say that stopping artificial insemination is wrong, but surely it's okay. You can decide not to do that. Second problem. He's right that it's hard to know which sperm would have fertilized the egg. There are millions, and it's hard to predict. But does that mean there's no fact of the matter? I don't know. I mean, it's not clear to me that there's no fact of the matter about which sperm would have made it if contraception hadn't been used. Maybe there is a fact about the fact of the matter. But in any case, even if there were indeterminacy about, it's not just hard to know, it's impossible to know, but there is no fact of the matter about which sperm would have made it. Even still, that indeterminacy doesn't mean there's no deprivation. Suppose that there's a large crowd, very large crowd in front of you, and you fire a gun into the large crowd, or you fire a bullet up into the air and it's going to land in the large crowd. Is that wrong? Yes, it's very wrong. Do we know now? Is there a fact necessarily about who would be hit? Maybe not, right? I mean, you're waving the gun around, and there need not be any particular fact about which person is going to be hit if you're stopped. But it still would be wrong. And so the situation with contraception in the sperm is the same as the gun in the crowd. It would be it's indeterminate who would be injured by your gun. It's indeterminate which sperm would be deprived of a valuable future. But it's still wrong in the case of firing the gun into the crowd, and so it should also be wrong. So there's wrongness even though there's indeterminacy in the gun case, and so the fact that there's indeterminacy in the contraception case doesn't mean that it's not wrong. It's indeterminate who will be harmed, but there's still a harm in both cases. So in both cases, there's still harm. So I think that Marquis both contradicts himself in his defense, in his sort of comments on these different possibilities, and I also think there's good reason to think that indeed the combination of sperm and ovum is deprived. So I think that Marquis' valuable future account is mistaken. That is it wrong to deprive any being of a valuable future? No. We can deprive the sperm and ovum of a valuable future and yet have done nothing wrong, as we do if we use contraception, or we're celibate, or we stop the process of artificial insemination. Now, here's a different suggestion. Depriving any being with moral status of a valuable future is wrong? Yes. What makes it wrong to kill someone is that kill a being, first of all, is the being has moral status and you deprived it of a valuable future. But that means that valuable future deprivation by itself, that's not enough for being wrong. The fact that an action would deprive a being of a valuable future does not in and of itself make it wrong. It's only in the presence of another feature that you get wrongness. It's when you have variable future deprivation and whatever gives moral status, those two together, then you have wrongness. But valuable future by itself doesn't go to wrongness, or valuable future deprivation, doesn't go to wrongness. So what is the additional feature? Well, perhaps it's sentience. Let's go back to this column and this chart, and here we have the three views, or the three moral sort of features that Marquis compared and said, okay, VFA does best. I've added another row, namely doesn't entail that conception is wrong, right? Or contraception is wrong. Whatever view it is that says killing is wrong, it should not entail that contraception is wrong, because contraception isn't wrong. The problem with the VFA is that it does entail that contraception is wrong. It's wrong. It gets this criterion wrong. So let's consider the sentience criterion. Well, is it wrong to kill aliens? If they're sentient, yes it is. Is it wrong to kill non-human animals? If they're sentient, yes it is. Does it entail the wrongness of active euthanasia? This is not as clear. I think this whole criterion is not a great criterion, because active euthanasia is itself a difficult topic to get clear about, and so I don't think it makes sense to test these different views on this criterion. Does sentience entail that it's seriously wrong to kill infants and young children? Sure. And sentience also explains why if we say that it's sentience plus deprivation of a valuable future that makes killing wrong, then that account does not entail that contraception is wrong, because when we use contraception, the beings who we deprive certain beings of a valuable future, but which beings, a sperm and ovum, are they sentient? Do they have mental states? Do they experience pleasure and pain, happiness and suffering? No. And so the account does not entail that contraception is wrong. So if we return to Marquis' valuable future account, I think it's pretty plausible that P2 is false. It's just too strong. It says there are too many things that there are many things that can be deprived of valuable futures where it's not wrong to deprive them of a valuable future. What is an alternative to P2? Well, we just saw that maybe we should use sentience. So we could say if a being is sentient, then it's prima facie very wrong to deprive it of a valuable future. Now, the embryo is not sentient. It does not have mental states, as far as we know. And for most of its existence, the fetus is not sentient, at least as far as we know. As I discussed in the first module, right now, our best evidence is that the fetus can probably start feeling pain around 29 or 30 weeks, that it starts getting conscious mental states around 29 or 30 weeks. We do not know that for sure. But at least for most of its existence, the fetus isn't sentient. And that means that the principle does not entail that it's wrong to kill an embryo. It doesn't say it's okay to kill an embryo, but it doesn't say that it's wrong. And similarly, for most of its existence, this principle doesn't say that it's wrong to kill a fetus. It doesn't say it's okay to kill a fetus, but it doesn't say it's wrong. Right? So the principle is just silent. What about a pro-choice argument? Could we build a pro-choice argument? Well, this principle, the one I've just suggested, is by itself of no use to a pro-choice argument. It says, if you're like this, then it's wrong to kill you. But the pro-choice argument needs to say, if you're like this, then it's okay to kill you. And this principle by itself doesn't say that. What we would need is a principle like this. It says, it is prima facie very wrong to deprive a being of a valuable future only if that being is sentient. That is, for it to be wrong to deprive you of a valuable future, you also have to be sentient. And then we can say, well, if you're not sentient, then it is okay to deprive you of a valuable future. But this is a different principle than that first one. This is basically the converse of the principle. It's the conditional more or less going in the reverse direction. And we haven't argued for this principle, and so as of right now, we don't have a pro-choice principle. What we've seen is that one pro-life argument has a bad premise. So to summarize Marquis, it would be nice if we could easily address the issue of the embryos and early fetuses' ethical status, and the valuable future account would straightforwardly tell us that whether or not they do have ethical status, and it would say yes, they do, because they have valuable futures, and that's enough to make it wrong to kill you. And so the valuable future account would sort of easily answer our questions about whether or not abortion is ethical. It wouldn't answer any questions about legally what we should do, because that's a much more complicated question about what sort of policies we should put in place in light of the ethical facts. But the problem in any case is that the VFA the valuable future account, does not do what Marquis wants it to do. It's too broad. There are too many things which it would say it's wrong to deprive of a valuable future, and so we need some sort of restriction. We need to say, if you're this kind of thing, then it's wrong to deprive you of a valuable future. The obvious candidates for this kind of thing would be sentience, or maybe personhood, but sentience looks like it's a better candidate. But once we take that on board, then the VFA is no longer of any use in a pro-life argument, because those features embryos and embryos lack, and fetuses lack for most of their existence. So could there be some other pro-life argument? Perhaps, but this pro-life argument doesn't succeed. Okay, so why will... And we could try to build a pro-choice argument by saying, well, not only is it the case that if you're sentient, then it's wrong to deprive you of a valuable future, but that it's wrong to deprive you of a valuable future only if you're sentient, and then we would say, well, embryos and fetuses aren't. Is that the case? That is this principle that says it's wrong to deprive you of a valuable future only if you're sentient? I don't know. And what we're going to look at in the next module is actually a different issue. We're going to see Thompson making a pro-choice argument in a different way. And so that will be what we'll be talking about next unit.